Hey folks, I'm Alex Dowd.
And I'm Katie Rife.
The Academy Awards finally air this Sunday, and in the final installment of our 4-week series on the major Oscar categories, we're talking about the big one, the top prize, Best Picture. Which of the 8 nominees will emerge victorious? And if we had the power to decide, which would we choose? Stay tuned to find out.
Welcome to Film Club.
Welcome again, folks. Thank you for listening to another episode of Film Club. This is actually the final episode in a 4-week series we've been doing on the Academy Awards. Yes, I know you're probably as sick of them as we are, but we've reached the end of the line. The Oscars are this Sunday, and they're in 2 days. Going to be an unusual ceremony, I imagine.
Yeah, I think so. They're splitting it up. Originally, the directive was everybody's got to show up. We'll socially distance you, but everybody's got to show up. But there was some pushback against that, and now it's going to be, it sounds quite complicated, where they have live in Los Angeles, live in London, and then also people zooming in. So
this is just
good luck.
So desperate. Can we just ignore? I mean, the fact that the Academy Awards are happening at all is I guess, an accomplishment in and of itself. But the notion that this is somehow going to be a normal, that they want to get it as close to a normal ceremony as possible, but it's like, guys, that's impossible. You can't have a normal ceremony. I will say, you mentioned this, I think, on an earlier episode, and it's one of the things I actually am super curious about, which is that Steven Soderbergh is helping orchestrate this year's ceremonies.
Yes, he is. And, he's known for his ingenuity. So maybe this, what sounds like an absolute headache to me on paper, maybe he'll be able to pull it off with grace.
I hope there's a lot of... one of the things, I feel like maybe I've brought this up before too, during this series even, is that one of the things I really love about the Oscars is I love the performance clips, and I love what they choose to highlight, and I just find it fascinating when, like, who makes those decisions, and how many seconds are we really dealing with? And some years you'll see it's like, oh yeah, of course they're going to go with that clip, and then other years it'll be like, I don't know, they'll pick like a comic moment that has like nothing to do with the rest of the performance, and you're just like, what the hell are they highlighting that scene for, So,
they're in that scene, sure.
In any case, we've been doing this for about a month now, and we've discussed on previous episodes the other major Oscar categories. The first installment was on supporting actor and supporting actress. And then we jumped in and talked about the Best Director race and also the original and adapted screenplay categories. And last week we talked about Best Actor and Best Actress. Best Actress being one of the most competitive races this year, I think. I think so. I'm very curious to see how that resolves. And we have finally reached Best Picture. And I feel like there was a time in which Best Picture was pretty locked up by Oscar night. I've been watching the Oscars since I was probably 9 years old. I haven't missed a ceremony since. And through most of my lifetime, and certainly through most of my childhood, the movie that was going to win Best Picture was pretty much a done deal by, honestly, probably weeks before the ceremony. There were obviously surprises. I remember the biggest surprise. Obviously now the biggest surprise of my lifetime is the whole Moonlight La La Land snafu.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I mean, you and I were in the same room for that one, and we were like, okay. We were like getting ready to like pack up our laptops, because we were working it. And then it was like, whoa. No, we're not leaving yet.
That was a remarkable moment of television and a remarkable moment in the Academy history. And I always remember, I'm not sure we're ever going to see a moment quite like that ever again. And I mean, Parasite winning was big too, but.
True. I mean, I think the people planning the Academy Awards don't want a moment like that again. I don't think that was, somebody was very stressed when that happened.
As amazing as that moment was, it did make me a little sad, I remember feeling, because it was like, on the one hand, the La La Land team is up there on stage, and regardless of what you think of the movie, it's very sad to think that you've won Best Picture and then be told, no, sorry, you didn't. And then besides that, like the Moonlight team, it sort of stole the thunder from that moment, because that was like a big moment for that movie and for movie culture in some ways. I mean, a movie that a movie that small had never won, a movie
Right.
with that many explicit queer themes in it had never won Best Picture. It was a huge deal, and the circumstances of its win, that them announcing the wrong movie, kind of eclipsed that a little bit, I feel like.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Like I think both parties got the rug pulled out from under them in that situation. But if I had to pick a side, I feel like I would feel a little more sorry for the Moonlight team, because like, I don't know. I mean, yeah, it's like this big moment is kind of permanently tainted,
Yeah.
which sucks. It really sucks.
Yeah, people will kind of always remember it for what happened that night, and not for the fact that it's a huge deal that Moonlight won Best Picture.
Yeah.
So I don't think we're going to see anything quite as remarkable as that this year. I don't think there's anything on here where if it won, any one of these films winning would not be as historic as, say, Moonlight winning or as Parasite winning.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think nothing here even has the potential, regardless of what wins, to be that big of a moment. I do think that we were talking before about uncertainty about Best Picture. I think that I was kind of working my way to the point that in the past few years, in the years since the 90s, really, what wins Best Picture has gotten a little tougher to guess, and we've seen a few more curveballs. And we're going to get later in the show into what we think will win, I guess. But it's to me, it's interesting that where once it was. There was a time where it was just like, okay, well, obviously this is going to win. I don't think we're necessarily living in that era anymore, you know?
Well, I mean, I'm going to address the elephant in the room and say that time when it was pretty inevitable what would win was a time where whatever Harvey Weinstein was backing was going to win. Like,
yeah,
you know, that was how it was in like the early 2000s. I think like the late 90s, early 2000s, you're talking about that certainty. It's because the Oscars were so dominated by that company and by that producer, and you know, obviously he's in jail now, so we're moving into a new era, and it does introduce an element of uncertainty. And it also is because, I mean, they changed the membership quite a bit in response to the Oscars So White controversy. And so, yeah, we are seeing different stuff getting nominated, you know, just because there's been some big shakeups in the Academy in the past 20 years, I'd say.
Also, there's the fact that the lineup has expanded as well. I mean, you know, through over a big portion of my lifetime and through a big portion of the history of the Academy, the lineup for Best Picture was 5 films. You know,
right?
And the final year that happened was 2008, and it is widely believed that the decision to basically double the lineup the following year was attributed to the fact that The Dark Knight, which had been heavily assumed to be in contention for Best Picture, you know, I mean, huge critical and commercial success. It was not.
We did a whole episode on that one too.
Right, exactly. Yeah. If you want to hear our thoughts on The Dark Knight, we did do a whole Christopher Nolan series last summer. You can go back and listen to that. The Dark Knight, huge deal, and then suddenly the morning of the Oscar nominations, it's not nominated, and people. I mean, you know, people were like revolting. What would it take for? I remember being quite shocked by that, because I was like, what exactly beyond genre bias and beyond a certain snobbery, what exactly was lacking in that film that the Academy wouldn't want to nominate it, you know? I mean, again, regardless of what you think
really.
of it. Right. I mean, like, even if you don't like that film, you have to acknowledge that by the Academy standards, that it kind of has everything going for it, other than the fact that it was a comic book movie, you know?
Yeah, like, there's very little about that movie that doesn't work for me. I can't really think of much of anything, you know? It'd be one of those ones where if you're writing a review of it, you'd kind of have to search to find something to critique, I think.
I think it's possible to dislike the film and to find things to critique in it, but I think as an enormous success, as something that critics liked, audiences loved, something that, I mean, we talk about the Oscars as a way for Hollywood to celebrate itself. The Dark Knight was the big smash of that year. The notion that the Academy wouldn't nominate it, it really did feel like them basically saying, well, we're not, that's for children or something, you know?
Sure.
And the
feeding into a certain aggrieved mentality that comic book fans still have.
Right, exactly. So the following year, it was expanded to 10 films, and then we saw a couple years of that, and there were some like kind of lousy movies that managed to slip into the race. So the Academy again course corrected and said, okay, well, it'll be a variable system now. It's between 5 and 10 films, depending on the votes. And ever since, we have seen somewhere in the, I think since they introduced that, it's basically been 7 to 9 films in the years since.
Somewhere in there.
Yeah. And this year we have 8. How do you feel about the expanded Best Picture lineup?
I mean, I agree that some kind of lousy stuff has gotten through because of the expanded lineup. But I think on a whole, it's a good thing to expand the lineup because it does kind of allow for a broader picture of the year in film, at least as much as, you know, the Oscars do reflect the year in film. Like, you have a slot for, you know, a movie like Black Panther, which is a big, you know, it's sort of similar to The Dark Knight, where critics liked it and audiences liked it, and it made a lot of money. Mm-hmm. You know, like that, it kind of saves a slot for something like that. And then you have your more traditional kind of awards bait, and then you have room for a couple indies to get in there. I don't know. I think overall it's a good thing. I mean, I don't think that it's quite lived up to the potential of the expanded race. For example, you know, Where's First Cow? I'm just going to complain about that. You know, and like something like, let's say, like the 40-year-old version, which came out last year, like hypothetically expanding the race would allow for something that's truly kind of out of left field like that to be on the list, but that's not happening. So I guess theoretically, I think it's a good thing, even if in practice it, you know, is never quite lived up to its potential.
Yeah, I have mixed feelings about it myself. I mean, I will admit that since expanding, it's allowed for the addition of some great films that might not necessarily have been cited before in the Best Picture lineup. Something like Amore, for example, being up for Best Picture.
Yeah.
Kind of hard to imagine that being in the race, although I will say that Haneke was up for Best Director that year, so maybe that would have been one of the 5. Who knows? I just feel like those extra options haven't necessarily expanded the Academy's perspective on what is a Best Picture worthy film. They've just allowed for some things that honestly shouldn't be in the lineup anyway. And I mean, I think about like the year that both The Imitation Game and The Theory of Everything were nominated. And it's like, you have these extra slots and those are the movies you're using to fill them out. Those are just like...
Yes.
You know, there's so much that's still being ignored. And I end up feeling that... Best Picture, there was a time when Best Picture felt kind of special in the sense that it was like, here's a group of people deciding these are the 5 films that mattered the most this year. Now, granted, their sort of discerning taste and what they're choosing said probably a lot more about them than it did about the year in film.
I think it really does. You know? It really does say a lot about them. Like when you read those anonymous Oscar ballots that come out in the trades every year, you kind of, it really clarifies
very much
that who is voting for these, and when you realize who's voting for it, it all kind of makes sense.
I just kind of, I sort of fear that there was a time in which people would get excited about the 5 films up for Best Picture, and it would turn into a conversation. People would try to go see all 5. I remember talking to my dad. Now growing up, my dad would always try to see the 5 Best Picture nominees. And so, you know, like I remember one year we went and saw 3 in one day. We basically jumped from theater to theater in my hometown of Lansing and saw some of the nominees. It was a lot of fun. And my dad was really diligent about that. And when they expanded the lineup, since they've done that, I don't think he has, there's been a year where he's seen them all. And I think that the the experience of trying to see them all, it's just kind of taken the wind out of his sails, and even trying to do that, because he's like, what are there 17 of these now? He's like, I'm not going to see them.
Well, you bring up a good point of something that is true about the Oscars, and a way that the expanded lineup is good for Hollywood, in that there are people who go to see movies because they were nominated for Best Picture, and these movies tend to come back out into theaters when they are nominated for Best Pictures. It's a money-making opportunity.
That's true. And I think that's a big part that's a big part of, that essentially is why any studio or any distributor gives two shits about the Academy Awards. They don't care about the prestige, really. They care about, can we make more money off of these movies? I mean,
Totally.
No studio would invest in for your consideration campaigns, would throw money at promoting these films and trying to get them nominated if there was no financial advantage to doing that,
Right. I mean, I think that, like actors and individuals care about being nominated for an Academy Award.
Yeah.
But at studios is a different story,
Right.
like you said.
Studios are the ones sort of launching these big campaigns on behalf of their stars and their directors. And I think that for them, I think the Academy Awards is essentially a cog in the machine of Hollywood money making, is what it is. Which is one reason, I think, why we almost never see films that are genuinely small and independent and outside of the system. I mean, we occasionally we do get indies nominated, but they are often indies that are being released by subsidiaries of larger companies,
I mean, that's one of the reasons why Moonlight is an outlier, like you were saying.
Right. Exactly. Like A24 as a player that sort of exists outside of that system. I don't know enough about A24's finances to know if they could be considered a major player at this point in terms of the money they have to play with. But they're not.
They're influential.
They are, and they're not a subsidiary of a larger studio.
Yeah, and I would argue that, in the indie world, I would argue that Moonlight winning Best Picture played a big role in making A24 a thing. Like, it's a bigger player because of that.
Very much so, yeah. But I mean, let's look at this year's lineup. We have Sony Pictures Classic, so that's obviously a subsidiary of Sony. We have Warner Brothers. We have two showings for Netflix, exactly, yep. We have Searchlight, which is now part of Disney, obviously. We have Focus Features. We have Amazon, and we have one A24 film as well. A24 is in the running this year as well. So, I mean, I think that the Academy Awards ultimately, that is the function that they really serve. And the reason that we don't see a lot of smaller, more interesting films is that, like, somebody like Kino Lorber getting nominated, a Kino Lorber film or something getting nominated, or In My Wildest,
even like Neon.
Yeah, well,
no, wait.
Neon's trying to be a player, certainly. Neon did win last year, though, with Parasite.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
that's true.
So I think they're in the A24.
They are a player now.
Yeah, I think they're kind of in the A24. I think those two, it'll be interesting over the next few years, because I feel like those two are now kind of grappling for some of the same real estate in the industry, and probably some of the same films even,
I'm sure that there are films where they both those studios put in offers, because their aesthetics are a little different, but it's along the same lines.
Totally.
Definitely.
Yep.
They're courting the same audiences for sure.
Big time. I feel like even some of the aesthetic language that they're using to sell these films feels very similar. The trailers.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Posters,
the graphic design of it all.
Yeah, exactly. So let's take a closer look at this year's lineup. Now, before we jump in, I would like to indicate that we're gonna talk about these 8 films. There are a few of them that we have talked about rather extensively on the show, so we probably won't spend a lot of time on those films, maybe just a little bit of time on them. And so if you want to hear our more extensive thoughts on these 3 Best Picture nominees, you can look at there are full episodes devoted, well, not necessarily full episodes, but there are episodes devoted to talking about them. They are Nomadland, which we talked about, honestly, we've been talking about Nomadland all season. We talked about it on our Best of the Year episode. We've talked about it over the last 3 weeks because it's well represented among the major categories. We did a longer segment on it during the Toronto International Film Festival last year. So lots of thoughts on that. We did an episode on Mank So you can find that on the site as well. And the final one is Judas and the Black Messiah, and we talked about that at the Sundance Film Festival. That's another one that has been well discussed on this show over the last few weeks. Mm-hmm. We'll probably touch on those again today, but those are, we're not going to talk a lot about those films. If you'll indulge me, can I attempt to do this without looking at the list? See if I can name them all?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's give it a shot. You can correct me if I miss any, or I'm going to give it a shot. Okay. Okay. So, Nomadland, The Father, Judas and the Black Messiah, Promising Young Woman, Minari, Sound of Metal, Mank, and The Trial of Chicago 7.
You got them.
Hey, I got them all.
Hey, you did it. Yeah, that's all 8, buddy.
That's probably honestly my ranking, and I think that's how I'm able to organize it in my head. You know?
That's how it folds out in your mind. Sure.
If you asked me to do it alphabetically, I would probably miss a whole bunch of them or something. Okay, so I guess maybe let's start by talking about The Father, and I do think this is one of the better of this year's nominees. We've talked about it a little bit over the last few weeks, and The Father, for those who don't know, it's based on a stage play by Florian Zeller, who also directed the film, and it is about an elderly man living in London who is going through the early stages of some unspecified form of dementia. And the film largely unfolds, I mean, I feel like we've seen a lot of films about dementia, and specifically about children, grown children trying to cope with their parents going through it. You know, I mean, I feel like there's...
Yeah, we have.
These past few years especially, I feel like, and we got a couple treatments of it last year alone, you know? We got the horror movie version, The Relic, and I feel like there was a documentary about it as well. The Father is unique in that it does attempt to unfold chiefly from the perspective of the person who is going through those stages of dementia, and he's played by Anthony Hopkins in the film.
Which does give it that kind of horror movie dimension, like you said.
No, I mean, I even said I think it's a better horror movie about dementia than Relic.
Yeah, I would agree with that, actually.
By the way, I think a second ago I called it The Relic, which, by the way, there is a movie called The Relic.
Totally different movie.
It's a different movie. That is a monster movie from the 90s set in Chicago. Yeah. Chicago, baby. And
Field Museum,
yep. That's a pretty fun movie, by the way.
Yeah, like I wouldn't call it, great.
Oh, no.
It's definitely a good time.
No masterpiece, but if you like monster movies, check that out. This may surprise you, was not a Best Picture nominee in 1997. I think The Father works better as a horror movie about dementia than Relic, honestly. And I think a lot of that is how deeply it attempts to put you into the mindset of somebody who's going through this. And it does that through a variety of really clever techniques. Everything from, like casting for one thing. Like one of the things is that Hopkins plays the main character. His daughter, who is up for Best Supporting Actress, is played by Olivia Colman. His daughter's not up for Supporting Actress. Olivia Colman is.
Olivia Colman is, yeah.
And at one point, another actor, Olivia Williams, shows up and claims that she is, no, I'm your daughter. And beyond the symmetry of them having the same first name, which to me feels like kind of a clever in-joke in the film. It's basically capturing the notion that we in that moment are as confused as he is. We're like, that's not the same person, And the movie
it's about
keeps
creating that state, and Sound of Metal is a lot like this too. We'll talk about that later, but both those films are about creating an empathetic state for someone who's going through something kind of extraordinary. Yeah.
And there's a whole bunch of, The Father does it through cognitive dissonance a lot, where we are presented with certain information, and then the movie kind of casually rejects that information or contradicts it, rather. So, that comes down to the casting, but it also comes down to bits of exposition we've been told, things about where the characters are living or what the characters' plans are. And you realize...
or who different kind of background players are. Is that somebody's husband? No, I'm not married. That kind of stuff.
Totally. And I think... As a piece of screenwriting and as a piece of construction, of narrative construction, I think it's pretty brilliant in that respect.
Yeah, the construction of this movie is, I agree, pretty brilliant. And the way, because it's all like, it all kind of contributes to that feeling of confusion, like you said,
Mm-hmm.
like, and it's kind of an uncomfortable feeling,
Yeah.
being so confused. And I think a lot of people kind of hate when movies are, there's a certain kind of person who's really hung up on plot holes and things like that. And I would kind of maybe encourage that person to watch The Father and be like, see, confusion can be a device.
Totally.
It's not a flaw, it's a device.
One might even say it is the driving emotion of this film, is a sense of bewilderment,
Yeah, absolutely. And this is Florian Zeller's first film that he directed, and I think that that's pretty remarkable because it is very. I mean, it's based on his play, so I'm sure he was, building on the architecture of the play. But just like all the complex structural stuff you were talking about is pulled off very well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you mentioned that too because I think it's actually kind of remarkable as an adaptation too because I don't think even though in some respects this thing does not. It's easy to imagine The Father on stage because it really is one location. It's this apartment, basically. Mm-hmm. So it's easy to look at it and understand that and to sort of look at it and instantly know, well, of course, this was a stage play. And the film does not make a whole bunch of attempts to, quote unquote, open it up. We don't go to other locations a lot or anything. But at the same time, Zeller is doing some really cinematic things with editing and with production design in this film and sometimes even with composition where that you can't do on the stage. So I don't know, this kind of looks like I have not seen the stage play. I would actually love to see it, honestly, but this to me feels like a model of how to move something from the stage to the screen.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I honestly, I don't know how they would create exactly the same experience on the stage because a lot of it is editing.
Yeah.
It is a lot of like two scenes are juxtaposed that contradict each other. And I don't know how you would really do that on the stage.
I suspect that it has a lot to do with the casting gimmick again and a lot to do with the dialogue, those elements. It just sort of feels to me like he must have looked at The Father and said, if I'm going to make a movie out of this, how can I take the ideas that I've introduced in the play and take them further,
Yeah, totally. And maybe making the movie allowed him to really fulfill the potential of, what he saw in the story,
Totally. I mean, how many times do you get a chance to sort of do a second version of something that you've made, aside from going back and pulling a George Lucas and changing the thing after the fact, But it sort of feels like I don't know. I mean, I have no idea how Zeller feels about it. It's possible that he prefers the stage version, but I think he should be proud of the movie he's made, regardless of what the play looks like. I should also say that Anthony Hopkins is heartbreaking in this movie.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about that last week. It's like, the casting is brilliant because it works in this kind of, like we were saying, we grew up with him. So it is like watching your dad go through this.
Yeah, I thought that was an astute point. So I mentioned last week's episode when we were talking about the Best Actor race, I mentioned that Hopkins was my favorite among the nominees. Your choice was Riz Ahmed, who is the star of another one of the nominees, Sound of Metal.
Yeah. Sound of Metal is my choice. And I think it's smart to talk about that right after The Father, because I think those two films are going for kind of the same thing, where in this case, it is hearing loss. Riz Ahmed stars in the film. He plays the drummer in a kind of sludge metal duo who loses his hearing very quickly and dramatically. And the film really immerses you in the experience of what it sounds like to lose your hearing, because the film is very invested, I think, in kind of portraying the reality of the situation. First, that being deaf isn't just absolute silence most of the time. There are different subtleties and layers and gradations to it. And also a point that the film makes very explicitly in the dialogue is that a lot of deaf people don't consider it to be a disability. They don't consider themselves disabled. It's just a different mode of being. And I think that this film really gets that across really empathetically. And a big part of that is Riz Ahmed's performance in the film. I think that he really, I mean, he is like, this is something I mentioned last week, but for the sound design of the film, talking about like when you're deaf, you hear the inside of your body a lot more, I guess. Mm-hmm. And so they used sounds like the sound of his blood, the sound of like his brain waves. I did an interview with the sound designer, and then they used a lot of kind of wild equipment. Like they put a microphone in his mouth and used the ambient sound of it. Yeah. And and so just the way that he really takes, you feel like you're inside of the character. And what's interesting about that to me is that Riz Ahmed's performance is also very internal. And I think that it all kind of comes together to create this experience of going through this with this guy, and kind of it educates you about the point that the movie's trying to make about being deaf as like sort of this dynamic experience. It's not just all of a sudden the lights go off, or I suppose not the lights, the stereo flips off. It's not like that.
Yeah.
I think that the movie makes that point in a non-preachy way, which I appreciated.
I agree with that. I will say that I think that the comparison to The Father is instructive, because one of the reasons I really like The Father is that I feel like it fully commits to the idea that we are trapped in the headspace of this character, that we have no real reprieve from this situation, because he does not. So it is fully committed to the idea of this is a wholly subjective experience. And if I have any beef with Sound of Metal, which I mostly liked, and for some of the same reasons that you liked it, if I have any beef with it, is I do think it's it does kind of take a half measure in terms of the stuff that it's, the really remarkable things it's doing with sound, in that I feel like there's a version of this movie that would entirely lock us into the cone of sound that exists around this character, and that would give us no out, because the movie kind of half immerses us in that, right?
It goes in and out. Yeah. It does go in and out. Like it's like the immersion doesn't start until like 10 or 15 minutes into the movie.
And that to me sort of feels like the movie half committing, in a sense. Maybe out of a fear that it would alienate audiences if we had a version of this that was wholly subjective, that was all about what is Ruben's particular, like how does he perceive the world both before and after. But I think that is a richer version, a richer potential version, with a little bit more integrity of conceit, in my opinion.
This part didn't bother me, because I felt like they made kind of astute choices about when to go in and out, and when they went in were points where kind of the emotional aspect of the story was a little bit more intense. For example, like we first get immersed when he starts losing his hearing. And I felt that the choices they made about when to go in and out were in service of kind of the emotional impact of the story. So that part didn't bother me.
Okay. I agree that the kind of insight into this particular world is super valuable and super interesting. You don't see that all the time. It's super interesting to see a film that is not entirely, but that has long stretches that are in ASL, for example.
Unsubtitled.
Unsubtitled, yeah, to sort of match his own particular situation,
right? Like, right, like the scenes you're talking about happen when he's not very good at ASL, so he really doesn't catch a lot of what people are saying. Yeah,
I do think that the scenes where he's in, I guess what is essentially rehab, he's at a house where they,
that's another layer of the story, is that he is sober, he's an ex-addict, and so the other member of the band, who's also his girlfriend, is concerned that losing his hearing is going to make him fall off the wagon. So he spends a good portion of the middle of the film at a sober living house for deaf people, so he can stay on the wagon while he's going through this. That's
a really interesting choice too, because I feel like many other filmmakers, when approaching this material, might just say, well, the fact that he's losing his hearing is enough, like that's his thing. But making him a recovering addict, I think, is a really smart choice in terms of adding some layers.
The thing that I appreciated in that about that aspect of the story is a more melodramatic kind of manipulative movie would have made him fall off the wagon.
Right.
And he doesn't. He does not relapse. And I think there's a melodramatic version of this story where, he ends up in a gutter somewhere because he's so distraught about losing his hearing. And that doesn't happen.
Totally. So it does, in some respects, I think it's a conventional movie, but I do think that it tweaks those conventions in interesting ways. And I do think the portions that are set at this rehab facility with Paul Raci, who was up for Best Supporting Actor this year, probably not going to win, honestly, but gives a really good performance, in my opinion. Those scenes, I think, are especially distinctive and interesting. I also think that this thing really sticks its landing. We won't talk about that ending necessarily, but I do think the ending of this is great.
Yeah, and okay, what's your opinion on the authenticity of the heavy metal of it all? Because towards the beginning of this movie, there is a kind of merch boot table scene that in my experience working merch tables, I was like, yeah, that's how it is.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, they seem like a real band. I mean, they're modeled after a band called Jucifer. If people know that band, very loud. I mean, it makes sense that they would choose a band that is notoriously plays extremely loud. Yeah, I mean, honestly, the stuff about their life as a band to me feels a little bit like window dressing. I mean, the movie isn't. This is not. If you go into this movie expecting that you're going to see a movie about a heavy metal band, I mean, that is kind of just the catalyst for what comes after.
Truly, it's just the setup. Yeah.
Yeah, but
I appreciate he wears a rudimentary penny shirt at one point. I thought that was fun. Yeah. That was a nice touch.
So ultimately, I liked this film, and I just kind of felt like it. I just felt like it could have gone a little bit further with this kind of extreme technique in terms of immersing us into his headspace. I thought that I was a little bothered by the film not just committing to that wholly, even if that would be kind of alienating to some audience members, but shouldn't it be alienating, I mean,
I wonder if that you're talking about, they pulled back a little bit to temper the alienation, because like we said, it also has these stretches where it's unsubtitled ASL, and the director has said that he wanted to make it alienating in the sense that if you were deaf and you watched the movie, you would catch everything because the dialogue parts are closed captioned, but the ASL parts are not subtitled, and that's like a deliberate choice. He wants it to, like, if you're deaf and watching the movie, you're going to get everything, but if you're not deaf, you're not going to get everything. And so I wonder if they tempered the kind of immersive sound design to kind of balance that out.
Well, fuck that. Go all the way, I say. I mean, here's the thing, though. Had it done that, I think it could have been a better movie, in my opinion, but it might not be up for Best Picture. I'll say that.
Sure, it'd be on our AV Club list, and we'd be like, "Where's Sound of Metal?"
Yeah, exactly.
That's funny.
So let's pivot to another movie that I think that we've talked about a little bit throughout the season, but we've never talked about at length. And I think it's a movie that is mainstream in a way that is crucial to what it's doing, and that is Promising Young Woman.
Yeah. As soon as he said mainstream, I was like, I know where he's going.
Yeah.
This movie, you can criticize it for kind of being a watered down Hollywood version of more radical kind of rape revenge texts. And something we talked about last week something that is one of the things I don't like as much about this movie is that it does pull its punches.
It does.
This movie, this is revealed quite early on, so I don't think I'm spoiling the whole movie by saying that Cassie, the promising young woman who you see in the trailers kind of, stalking people and, being this avenger, she doesn't actually kill these guys. She basically just scares them. Mm-hmm. And that is, for a movie that is pretty invested in being edgy, that feels like pulling a punch to me. I don't know.
Yeah, well,
I want to see her kill the guys.
I don't know, because I think some of the kind of emotional terrorism that one of the critiques I've heard of this film that I find persuasive, if not a huge deal breaker for me necessarily. In this is mostly a film I like, but one of the critiques I've seen is that this is a rape revenge film that kind of reserves its its harshest punishment for the women.
That's true.
You know?
It does. Yeah.
The character.
Talk about emotional terrorism.
Yeah, I mean, she 100% wages war on female characters with, one might say, up until maybe the last act of this film, the most aggressively with a pair of female characters. And but honestly, the scene, there's a scene with Alison Brie in this film where I knew that I was watching something that was at least attempting to press people's buttons in a way that I find at least theoretically admirable. And the scene with Alison Brie in this, I was like, wow, I cannot believe the movie is going there. And again, it does, maybe in this case, kind of thankfully pull its punch on that later on.
Yeah, it pulls its punch on that too. But the setup of it is very, that wades into some really sticky territory about revenge and eye for an eye and what's appropriate.
Right, and you don't necessarily,
what is an appropriate kind of revenge?
You don't necessarily see that because you talk about a lot of rape revenge films. Plenty of them are not particularly interested in any sort of nuance, and also we're just kind of
it's not the
most nuanced genre. I mean, I won't say that there aren't nuanced ones. I haven't seen Violation yet. I understand that is a more thoughtful one. You mostly liked that.
Yeah. I mostly liked Violation. But Violation takes this thing that we're talking about overkill and proportionate justice, and that takes that idea all the way over the top.
Right, exactly. I just feel like the genre in general sort of sets up a binary that I think is actually kind of easy, which is that our main character is brutalized and raped, and it's awful, and then she gets revenge, and there's really usually in this genre, and in some of the quote-unquote classics of this genre, I use that term. There are scare quotes around that in this case, but
it's not a genre for everybody.
It's definitely not.
But a surprising number of feminist women are kind of into it.
They're definitely interesting films, and they are texts that are 100% fertile for discussion and for analysis. But I just feel like most of the time with this genre, by the time the killing starts and our main character is getting her revenge, there's not a lot of complicated feelings involved in that. We're just kind of good, they get what's coming to them, And so it's always really cathartic in that sense, but it's not doing anything more than asking the audience to just feel good about bad people getting their just desserts,
Right, yeah, and the best movies about revenge complicate the question, right?
Totally.
Old Boy. Old Boy is a classic example of a movie that's about revenge and seems very straightforward until the end.
Right.
And Lady Snowblood, another classic revenge fantasy, kind of introduces this element at the very end of once the revenge is done, what's there to live for, in the ultimate emptiness of the whole enterprise.
Another film that I think both of us quite liked, a recent film that I think interrogates it in an interesting way too, is The Nightingale. I think
yeah, totally.
That is very much in the rape revenge tradition, and I think is really smart about that in a lot of ways.
Yeah, totally.
Promising Young Woman. One of the things I find interesting about the film is that it is not as simple as just Cassie's not this. She's not established immediately as this badass avenging angel who goes out into the night and kills these men. I mean, there is an element of that because she's confronting them. And I've also heard people one of the critiques I've heard of this film that I also find interesting is that people are like, yeah, if Cassie did that, that would in no way, it's not like these men would turn around and change their ways. They would just be like, well, they would be like, sex is a war, and I should be winning it.
Yeah, it might make them worse.
It might make them worse, actually.
No, that's a good point. In that, a critique of Promising Young Woman I find very compelling, and one of the things that does kind of bother me about the movie, it kind of relates to the pulling the punches thing, is that for a film that is, proudly misandrist and really, pushing buttons in some ways, it has a lot of faith in the system. Like you said, there's the faith that these men are going to see the error of their ways and see the light after they've encountered Cassie. and we're not going to go too much into it, but the film's ending has a certain amount of faith in the system, and in, there is a quote unquote good man who is essential to the way that this film wraps up, that, I don't know, at its core, it has some faith in like the goodness of people and the goodness of authority figures that doesn't really jive with its more Screed-like aspects, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a little whiplash in the film in its attitudes about authority, because obviously, I mean, we should say we have not discussed the plot much. For those who have not seen the film, Carey Mulligan plays a young woman who is several years out from college. She went to med school. Something happened in med school that the film alludes to and eventually reveals. But she basically spends her nights going out to bars, pretending to be blackout drunk, and when the men take her home and try to take advantage of her, she sort of flips the tables on them. So the movie, I think, is on the ground level, on the basic level, does offer a critique of institutions in that it says women are often not believed, and the system fails women who have been assaulted. Sometimes there's a lot of closing of ranks, particularly in college. Like people will, the university, trying to protect its own reputation, will sometimes close ranks and squash these stories. So there is a critique in it. I agree that the ending is a mistake in some ways.
Yeah, but at the same time, I admire the boldness of the ending. In other ways, the ending is very, very bold, and definitely pulls the rug out from under you and your expectations of what you're going to get from this kind of movie. Yeah, that is true, because one of the women that Cassie reserves her, some of her cruelest punishment for is the dean of a college who helped cover up this crime, this incident. And even the title of the movie, Promising Young Woman, kind of relates to, like the Brock Turner case, where, they talk about his potential and how he's a promising young man. And so the title is a play on that. And what the film's asking is like, well, what about her potential? What about all the potential that's lost when these women end up dropping out of school? What about that?
I think it's really smart about that, honestly. And I think it does have a bit of a barbed edge when it's talking about the way that we value the futures of young men over young women, and that might seem like an obvious point to you and I talking about it, but I don't know if it's culturally obvious.
No, it's not culturally obvious in particular. Yeah. And no, making it a college, having the incident, the assault happen at a college, I think is very smart, because it like that is the site where a lot of what she's trying to make a point about happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like we could talk about this movie like all day. Honestly, there's a lot to talk about with it, but
a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the thing that I admire about it the most, and to circle back to something, is that people have critiqued it for being sort of a softer, more mainstream version of the rape revenge film. But to me, that is crucial to what it's trying to do. I think this is a movie that is very much interested in speaking to the type of audience who would not normally go see a rape revenge film.
I would agree with that. Yeah. And engaging with these kind of sticky issues that, a lot of like you said, an audience who wouldn't go see Violation, for example,
right.
Like it is a way for them to engage with these issues. And I think that's pretty smart. Yeah. And I think that it's smartly written. I think that, there are some underlying assumptions to it that are definitely open to critique. But I think overall, like for what it's trying to do, it's successful, I think.
Yeah. The film's kind of mainstream qualities operate as a trap, I think. And if you're watching the film and you have no idea what it is, you go into it and you don't know what it is, you might have certain assumptions about where the film is going. In my opinion, there is a very smart subplot involving a character played by Bo Burnham that is designed to kind of play on the audience's familiarity with this kind of character, with this kind of subplot, and to sort of subvert our expectations about where this element of the story might go. I think plenty of savvy audience members might get ahead of it, but at the same time, I still think it's a really smart way to dismantle a certain attitude about maybe there being good and bad men in the world. you know?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's not even about there being good and bad men in the world because, like I said, there is a minor male character who, is unequivocally good in the movie. But it's just like what makes somebody a nice guy?
Right.
Is it because he's like a kind of a bland looking white dude with a smile on his face? Is that automatically a nice guy?
Yeah.
And people make that assumption a lot. Like, for example, Thomas Middleditch, who just got, kind of exposed in an LA Times article as a kind of serial groper and harasser. A lot of people thought he was a nice guy because he's a dorky white guy with a, who's kind of sued, oh, shucks, oh, me? And interrogating that idea is very interesting. But something that I was just thinking about this movie is maybe the people who would critique it the most, like to get to your point, it's not for them. Like people that wish it was more radical, people who have seen a lot of these kind of movies, and so they can kind of clock the influences, stuff like that. Like, it's not for you. You've seen these other texts. It is for people who would not check out those other texts.
Exactly.
Maybe.
And I also think it is for people, for some men who might consider themselves one of the nice guys. And I think that it is designed to target that notion and to get people asking, are there times in my life when I've looked the other way, or I have, through non-intervention, I've allowed bad things to happen,
Complacency. Yeah. And, to get to the critique of it, say, reserving its harshest punishment for women, I think that it is something that people can kind of misconstrue and twist about feminism is the idea that you have to support all women. It's like, no, women can do fucked up stuff too.
Yeah.
Women can be enablers. Women can play active roles in, letting rapists off the hook.
Exactly. You're not a bad feminist if you think that Sarah Huckabee Sanders sucks,
Right. But there are people that will try to weaponize that idea and be like, oh, I thought you supported women. And it's like, not when they have bad intentions.
Totally. So we both like this film. We both we both have some reservations with it, and I do think it's a movie where I've read raves of it and I've read pans of it, and I've found both of them kind of persuasive, to be honest.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, I read the critiques and I agree with a lot of them, but at the same time, there's something about the movie that I can't write it off as trash. I just can't.
I think it is provocative pop entertainment in some ways, and I don't dismiss that so easily necessarily. Like a movie that I think is intended for a large audience that also has some ideas and wants to push buttons. To me, that is valuable. Yeah, so I'm glad to see it in the lineup. I frankly am still sort of. There's a part of me that's still sort of surprised that it's a Best Picture nominee, just because I do think it's a little bit more provocative than the average film that might end up in among the Best Picture nominees,
But because of that sort of Hollywood mainstream quality that you're talking about, and maybe because of the pulled punches, that's why it's here,
Right.
Like you were talking about, if Sound of Metal had been actively alienating, it might not be on the Best Picture lineup. If Promising Young Woman had gone full scum manifesto.
Promising
it might not be.
If this film had ended where I thought it was going to end, I do not think it would be in this lineup. Although I actually think it might be a more powerful film if it ended, we'll say 20 minutes early.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, there would be, I feel like there would be mass audience revolts if the movie ended the way that I'm talking about. But again, we won't
totally
talk further about that. So here's a movie that I think neither of us like. And that is Trial of the Chicago 7.
Yeah. It's just kind of, to me, like, it was, I don't know. This is a classic Oscar, when you talk about quote unquote Oscar bait, this is one of those.
Yeah, and I mean, this is like a movie that you would always expect to be nominated,
Absolutely. And to me, like, you want to talk about putting soft edges on things. This movie definitely put some soft edges on a story that is about radicals. It's about political radicals. It definitely tries to posit being a centrist as the rational and reasonable thing to do. And it's like, yeah, but I mean, these guys weren't centrists, and
definitely were not.
Yeah. For
those who don't know, the film is set in the late 1960s, in 1969, I believe specifically. And it is about a group, it's a true story, It is about a group of anti-Vietnam War protesters who gathered in Chicago for the 1968 Democratic National Convention. There was a lot of violence around the convention, instigated by the police at the time, and the U.S. government.
Nothing new. CPD, they're still doing it.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Right, exactly. Like, how much has changed in almost half a century. Anyway, the U.S. government would look to scapegoat these activists, these sort of prominent countercultural figures, and there was basically a trial, kind of a kangaroo court, honestly. It was very clear, very very early on that the judge had made up his mind about the guilt of the defendants, and it was a huge media event, partially because some of the protesters were kind of colorful personalities. Abby Hoffman, who's played in the film by Sacha Baron Cohen, had kind of a stand-up comics persona as a countercultural figure.
Yeah. He would kind of have these. They show it in the movie. He would kind of have these nightclub events where he would kind of tell the story of what was happening in the trial in, like you said, a stand-up style.
Yeah, I mean, Hoffman understood, I think, in a sense, as an activist, he understood the importance of having a compelling personality. I think he sort of consciously or not situated himself as the kind of he kind of created a cult of personality for himself with the idea that he was that might draw more young people to. Well, I mean, I guess that's the charitable explanation. Some might say that Hoffman. The movie even raises the question of whether Hoffman is doing all of this because of a sense of ego and he wants to be celebrated, etc.
Right. I thought that was one of the more interesting threads in the movie. 100%. was the sort of conflict between more theatrical, attention-grabbing, cultural activism versus, nuts and bolts political organizing.
Yeah, I mean, the best scene in this movie, and I would say the one great scene in this movie, there is a conversation, a kind of argument between Sacha Baron Cohen's Abby Hoffman and Eddie Redmayne's Tom Hayden, where they're sort of in their, I guess, their headquarters, I guess you could call it. And they're arguing about what's the best way to really engage with people, and what's the best path forward for activism in this country and the countercultural movement. And they're sort of on different sides of the divide, where Hayden is sort of saying we need to be on the inside, we need to win elections, and that's how we change things. And Hoffman sort of says, no, it's about changing people's minds and cultures, the culture itself, and changing people's hearts. And it's a really great scene. It's the one scene where I feel like Aaron Sorkin, who wrote and directed the film, is firing on all cylinders. And you can sort of see, I almost imagine the movie built around that idea, because that particular question of what's the best path forward for the left is one that is still very much relevant today.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my personal opinion would be that you need both, but, This isn't a political podcast. So.
Yeah, I mean, that might be closer to what Sorkin believes, too, although I kind of see him identifying more with Hayden's perspective on this, because
For sure.
I do think he's somebody who believes in the system.
Yeah, and the character of Hayden and that belief in the system was kind of what I found a little bit deflating about this movie. Was in the end, it was like, guys, don't worry, the government isn't all bad. Right. And it's like, that sort of like tug towards the center is something that, speaking of politics, leftists are supposed to do, like, be reasonable, guys. And it's like, but what if the government is bad? What if it is fundamentally flawed? And like we were talking about last week, Judas and the Black Messiah, I guess that at that a lot more explicitly. But that sort of like drift towards, hey guys, don't be so radical, was the thing I thought was most disappointing about Trial of the Chicago 7.
I mean, I completely agree. I think that it's a centrist's vision of what was essentially a group of people on the left fighting for their freedom and fighting for ideals bigger than themselves. So I'm sort of, honestly, I'm a little offended by Sorkin taking this material and Sorkinizing it so much, The pushing everyone to the center, that isn't just lazy, like lazy drama, in my opinion. I think it's actually kind of disrespectful to the real people involved in this. I'm not somebody who in general thinks...
Could be both.
Yeah. I'm not somebody who in general who thinks that it's totally inappropriate. We talked about this a little bit last week, I think, or maybe the week before. I'm not somebody who thinks that you can't take poetic license and that you can't take liberties with the facts. I think if you can make a more interesting movie, I say go for it, generally. It just feels in this case like he took a really, really fascinating chapter in United States history, a really tumultuous time, and a really fucked up thing that happened, and he made it seem, seem more like a conventional courtroom drama or something, rounding everybody's edges off, that sort of thing, and whole cloth inventing situations and moments. But he also took people who were very staunchly anti-establishment and pushed them just a little bit closer to the center. And he did that on the other side, too. I mean, of all the... there are a lot of distortions in this film, and there are a lot of... He takes a lot of these real people and makes them closer to a screenwriter's invention, But the one that really...
that's the problem.
Yeah, they don't seem like real people. They seem like... characters out of a screenplay a lot of the time, honestly.
Yeah.
But the one that really pissed me off was Joseph Gordon-Levitt, he's playing one of the prosecutors, and in real life that guy was notorious. I mean, people thought of him as he was like a fascist. I mean, that guy's values were extremely right-wing and extremely authoritarian. And the movie reinvents him as this kind of reluctant conservative who is really principled, like somebody who you might see, honestly, like an Arnold Vinnick figure on for those who've watched The West Wing, somebody who's like one of the good Republicans is the idea.
Right.
And that's bullshit. That's not who that guy was. And the notion that we needed that in this story speaks very much, I think, to Sorkin's almost desperate desire to want to believe that there are good people on both sides, so to speak, and good actors on both sides. And sorry, I just don't believe that anymore.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say, is that Trial of Chicago 7 seems very self-important in the sense that they're like, this is still relevant now. And it's like, yeah, but the way that you framed this is like, guys, there's good actors on both sides, and maybe these leftists just need to learn to compromise, is extremely unhelpful in today's climate.
And really out of touch. Really out of touch.
Yes. Yes, it is so out of touch. I
mean, the movie seemed relevant in it kind of lucked into some... I guess I hesitate to say lucked because of... But essentially, the movie came out at the end of a summer, at the end of last summer, basically, in September of last year, after we had this huge summer of social justice protests and Black Lives Matter protests, and it suddenly seemed timely and relevant in that respect, in that it was well-timed, that it was coming out and reflecting some of the ideas of that America was still dealing with and grappling with. But it felt to me like a really out-of-touch perspective on all of that. And I think would have seemed out of touch in 1970, too, honestly. I think if most of these guys saw this movie, they would probably go, I don't know, you're kind of soft-pedaling our politics, and you're kind of empathizing a little bit too much with a system that was just trying to railroad these guys,
Yeah, and also the way that, Bobby Seale from the Black Panthers is a character in the movie, but I think it's interesting that we really don't see much of what's going on, in his life outside the courtroom. I thought that was an interesting choice.
He's barely a character. He's barely a character in the film.
Another way they're soft pedaling, I suppose.
Yeah. I mean, Sorkin is not interested in the Black Panthers, and he is not interested in... He is interested in the moment where, the by the way, very real moment that did happen, where Seale was bound and gagged in the courtroom because he wouldn't... I mean, he basically was insisting on defending himself, and the judge wasn't having that. That moment in the movie plays like a moment that's meant to inspire and enrage the other characters.
Right. Yeah. He makes that moment he makes that moment where, you know, a black man is being treated in these really brutal ways that recalls slavery and recalls the violence of the system against black people in this country, and makes it about the white guys and how great they are for not supporting it. And it's like, what?
Specifically Eddie Redmayne's character, who, again, he plays Tom Hayden, and that's another total distortion of who that guy was. I mean, the movie acts like he's like this kind of reluctant, he's like, oh, guys, we need to like, we shouldn't upset anyone, so that he can have the full arc of coming around in the end, you know, which is just fucking bullshit. That's not what that guy was.
It is.
Yeah, I don't know. This movie pissed me off, and I honestly don't think it even really works in the way that some people seem to think it works, which is just like fun Sorkin political theater. Because I'm not immune to Sorkin as a kind of cornball walk and talk theater guy, you know. Like I enjoy the West Wing. I like The Social Network. I like Steve Jobs even, which has its problems, but I think that when Sorkin is firing on all cylinders, his movies and his television can be exciting and fun and witty, and I just don't think he brings his A game to this one.
Yeah, I think that the thing that this movie is lacking, that a couple of the other movies in this lineup have, is, you know, we were talking about putting you in the perspective of the characters. Mm-hmm. This movie isn't really about the perspective of the characters. It's Aaron Sorkin's perception of these characters is what comes through. Yep.
Agreed. Yeah, I mean, one of the issues with Sorkin as a writer, I think you could lodge, is that sometimes every character sounds exactly the same in one of Sorkin's films. You know,
they sound like Aaron Sorkin.
They sound like Aaron Sorkin. Yeah, they're just these wit machines who are constantly throwing out these bon mots. You know. Anyway, so let's move on from that film. My personal least favorite of the nominees, I guess it's kind of in contention with Mank, another Netflix film, which I think has a few more interesting ideas, honestly, than Trial. But we've talked a lot about Mank on this podcast again. Yeah, maybe we don't need to relitigate it.
It just didn't do it for me. I don't think it really did it for you either. It was just kind of like, you know, I don't think that Mank is entirely without merit. Like, you know, I wouldn't put it on my worst films of the year list, but it just didn't resonate for me. I didn't really feel, you know, the things that are so exciting. We talked about this in the director's episode. The things that are great about the best Fincher films are kind of lost in the shuffle here. And yeah, it's just, meh. That's my review of Mank.
I found it dramatically unpersuasive, I think, is what it comes down to, is that I don't think it makes Mank's... I don't think it invites us into Mank's creative process, and I also don't think it makes us feel the urgency in which that he felt to write this thing. You know, I mean, if the whole thing, I mean, there have been a lot of critiques about Mank in that it's kind of it's kind of floating a debunked theory about the authorship of Citizen Kane.
Yes.
That Pauline Kael,
I believe, put out in the 70s, right?
Yeah, this giant, massive essay called Raising Kane that basically existed in order to shift the authorship of Citizen Kane to Mankiewicz, as opposed to Orson Welles. That's been sort of widely debunked over the years and discredited. I don't really care about that. I mean, I think if the movie had been able to make that super compelling, then I would be fine with it. Whatever. I don't care if it's that true to the facts, I guess. But
alternate history is fine.
Exactly.
If you do it correctly.
Exactly. But I just feel like the whole thing is built around this notion that sort of around the impetus of the project and why Mank wrote it, and I just never found it dramatic. I never found it dramatically compelling, his motives for supposedly creating Citizen Kane, and the movie just does not properly develop his relationship with Hertz, I think, for one. Yeah. And it feels honestly like I know that Fincher made this because his father wrote it, and the screenplay has some clever dialogue writing in it, I think. But I think that a lot of this film's mistakes come down to that screenplay.
Yeah, and it is kind of hard to critique it because it's like, you know, like, ugh, why do you love your dad so much that you made this movie? Like, you know, that just seems cruel to say, but it's not a very Fincher-esque movie, I don't think.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, like, we talk about it. It might be his most personal film for that reason, but there's no... I don't get the sense that Fincher is deeply invested in this material.
I didn't feel that either. It felt like a dutiful son kind of thing to me.
Like, well, I'm gonna do this for my dad, but like going out and getting the job you don't want because your dad wants you to get the job. Like, all right, Dad,
exactly.
I'm working at the office now. You happy?
Yeah. You know? Getting a law degree because your dad thinks you should get a law degree.
Exactly.
Kind of thing.
I mean, I'm much. This is potentially one of his more sentimental films, and yet I'm much more moved by something like The Game, which I think might more genuinely tap into Fincher's sort of perhaps underutilized emotional vocabulary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. Well, speaking of personal stories and kind of tributes to the filmmaker's father, Minari is that as well, because Lee Isaac Chung, the director of the film, it is loosely autobiographical. It's kind of based on his own life, where it's about two immigrants from Korea, and it's a whole multi-generational family. You got grandma, parents, kids. They all moved to Arkansas. I believe it's like the 80s.
Yeah, it's in the 1980s.
In the film.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. And they try to start a vegetable farm to provide groceries to, Asian supermarkets that are popping up throughout the region as, more Asian people are moving to the United States. And so it is loosely autobiographical in that way. And I would think that the way that Steven Yeun's nominated for Best Actor for playing the patriarch of the family, I think that there is a big element of tribute to the writer-director's own father in kind of the portrayal of that character. And because it's sort of painted as one thing I think is interesting about this film is it kind of asks if all of this is worth it, if the American dream is really worth all the kind of like the strife within the family that it produces, not to mention, the hostile outside forces that they're facing as, a minority group in a conservative area. And I think in the end, though, the film does land on the side of, yes, it was worth it. Yes, the American dream is worth the struggle.
And I'm fine with a film deciding that. I mean, we talked about one of our issues with Trial of the Chicago 7 is that it seems to kind of land at a point where it says, yes, the system works. But I just feel like Sorkin isn't wrestling enough with the possibility that the answer is no. Whereas Minari, I think, very much is wrestling with the question of whether or not this notion of the American dream is something worth pursuing. If it ends up saying that it is, I do think that it's a movie that at least raises some doubts about that. And the film does tackle it from a perspective I don't think that we always see in American movies, being about a family with some immigrant roots. I think the specificity of this film is one of the best things about it, that it really is interested in getting us into some of the nitty-gritty of this family's experience. There's a lot of really, I think, smart, sharp details. And I admire that this movie doesn't become a misery slog, even though it is about hardship.
That is one of the things I appreciate about it, because you're talking about how there's other versions of these movies. The other version of Sound of Metal is he relapses. Right. There's another version of Minari where racism could have been at the very center of the story, and it could have turned into something sort of like this Amazon Prime show Them that is getting a lot of criticism for really putting the racism up front in a traumatic way.
Got it. Yeah, no, and Minari avoids that. I mean, it's a fairly gentle film in some respects, and it's another one. It's the one film in this year's lineup that I look at and say this movie benefited from the fact that nothing else, that Hollywood didn't have a lot of big projects in theaters this year, because I think on a whole, this lineup is probably pretty close to what it would be if we had seen a normal year. I think that we might have seen something like Steven Spielberg's West Side Story in contention. There might have been a couple big studio movies. I think most of these movies are films that would probably be in the conversation regardless. Minari is the one that feels like it has benefited the most, just because it is the one that I think it might technically be the smallest of the nominees, at least in terms of something like budget and scope. Although obviously Nomadland is a pretty small film too in that respect. Mm-hmm. And I just feel like Minari, even as Minari won Sundance last year, even as the big Sundance winner, does not feel like the type of film. It feels like the type of film that would end up getting overshadowed by bigger movies in a different year. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, maybe get like one acting nomination.
Right.
It wouldn't have as many nominations. I would argue that I think in a normal year we might have seen one or two acting nominations for this film. Steven Yeun or Yoon Jung might have been nominated in a normal year, but yeah, I'm not sure it would have been up for Best Picture under normal circumstances because it is kind of a small movie, and that's something that I kind of liked about it. When I think about Minari, I think of it as just like a small little jewel of a movie. Mm-hmm. You know, it's kind of a small personal story that takes place in kind of the farm is kind of, it's not quite off the grid, but it's kind of out there a little bit. It's kind of an isolated area. And you're right that for a movie that has a lot of kind of dramatic family fights in it, and it's kind of sweet natured. Mm-hmm. And temper. It's all tempered, and it's got this sort of literal golden glow of nostalgia on it. The cinematography is very glowing.
It reminded me a lot of the Japanese filmmaker Koreeda, who his film Shoplifters was won the Palme d'Or at Cannes a couple years ago, and he's been kind of making these gentle, sometimes slightly prickly family dramas for a lot of his career. These very humanistic films, and as with a lot of his work, I looked at this and thought that occasionally this threatens to be a little kind of a little slight at times, to sort of disappear on the wind at times. But it has this rich affection for its characters and this rich sense of place that I think can't be denied.
Yeah. I would agree. I would agree with that. Definitely the sense of place, and there is the use and the title of the film. I thought that was sort of rode the line between hokey and poetic, but it came down on the line of poetic to where Minari is an herb that can grow under kind of difficult conditions, which maybe it's a little bit obvious of a metaphor for what this family is going through, but also at the same time you have this beautiful image of the grandmother of the family plants this herb down along sort of a tucked away creek bed, mm-hmm. and you kind of have this sort of, I thought that the visual image of this kind of little sun-bathed peaceful area where this herb can grow. I thought visually that was kind of a poetic image. Yeah,
it's an evocative image for sure. Mm-hmm. I do also appreciate the prickliness. That there is a little prickliness in Minari, and that there's a version of this movie where the father, played by Steven Yeun, is just sort of celebrated uncritically as this dreamer. And you can look at sometimes when somebody makes a film about their parents and about their own life, they end up sort of seeing those memories through a rose colored lens, so to speak. And mm-hmm. I appreciate
there's a little bit of that in this.
There is a little, but I do feel like he acknowledges that Yoon's character, that the father character, is somebody who is in some respects privileging his own success and his dreams over the happiness of his family in some respects.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. It's not, he does complicate complicate the sort of, the American dream aspect of what we were talking about. Yeah. I think that is one of the good things about this movie is it complicates in the sense of, is it worth it? And also, like you said, in the character based on Lee Isaac Chung's father, is it's not presented as an unequivocal good, what he's doing, right? Like you said.
Honestly, talking about it, I like the movie a little bit more. We get into the discussion. I think it's an easy film to underrate in some respects because it is so understated in a lot of ways. But
and kind of sweet, which can be easy to
dismiss. right?
To dismiss.
Yeah,
Yes.
but talking about it, I realize that it has a lot going for it. I do think it's a strong film in a lot of respects, as is Judas and the Black Messiah. And we've talked a lot about this film already, and particularly over the last few weeks. I don't want to spend too much more time talking about it. We've mentioned this already. I do think it is a strong antidote to the distortions and the romanticizing and the general bullshit of Trial of the Chicago 7.
Yeah, Trial of Chicago 7 looks like even more bullshit put up against this movie.
Yeah.
You know, this movie has no faith in the system whatsoever.
And why would it? I mean, it's about. The film is about the undermining and eventual murder of Fred Hampton of the Black Panthers by the FBI, and criticism is not a zero-sum game, but almost everything that Trial of the Chicago 7 does, Judas and the Black Messiah does better,
Pretty much.
In dealing with the history, in looking at this particular period of time, the performances are stronger. I think it's a better directed film. If I can get one more dig in on Trial, I just don't think that Sorkin is a particularly expressive filmmaker,
No, his movies are all about the script, which is fine. But, some people can do both.
Yeah. Oh, I just had a wild idea. What if Fincher, instead of making Mank, directed Trial of the Chicago 7? And what if Sorkin wrote the screenplay for Mank? I think they'd both be improved,
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, okay. I'm wrapping my brain around this, and you know what? Let's do it.
Let's get it made. All right.
2022, baby.
Yeah.
Nomadland is another movie that really doesn't have a lot of faith in the system. Mm-hmm. I think that it combines, I would say these sort of... this movie's been critiqued for not going hard enough on Amazon, and apparently the... book that it's based on does go a little bit harder on Amazon, but I don't think that's the project of this movie. I think it is a very humanistic movie, and it's all about, the people that live this lifestyle rather than the conditions that they live under. But I think Nomadland in the end is kind of an interesting combination of a lot of the stuff we're talking about, where in the sense that it has a little bit of romance to it. It kind of believes in the romance of the open road, but at the same time, it has a very clear-eyed view of the fact that, you can't depend on the system you have to take care of yourself in America, that the system is not going to help you. So I think that it strikes a really interesting balance in that way, in terms of what it's trying to say.
It's interesting how many of these nominees you can look at and say that they have something to say about America. I mean, you can maybe say that about most years. I mean, because American film is so well represented by the Academy Awards, because so many of the films that end up being nominated are American or even Hollywood films, they are probably going to even accidentally say something about America. But
true,
I would almost say the only film in this group that doesn't have something to say about America is The Father, because it's just simply not set in America, The Father's the only one. The rest of them, I feel like, all have some kind of perspective on America to some degree.
To some degree,
yeah. I generally find Nomadland's. I find its perspective on America to be attractive, and I will say that the controversy around it does strike me as a little bit silly. I mean, I will say that Chloe Zhao probably made a choice there, where she was like, here's my choice. This can be a little bit harsher about Amazon, or I can get scenes inside the Amazon factories.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
Because there's no way Amazon would have signed off on this if it had a bunch of stuff that was super critical of Amazon.
Yeah, they wouldn't have let them shoot like an extremely critical scene at the distribution center. That's for sure.
No way. And honestly, that to me speaks to this movie's spirit and its kind of interest, because I think you're right that this is not a movie that's particularly interested in issuing a bunch of damning judgments. Like the people looking at Nomadland and going, why isn't it harder on Amazon? I mean, this isn't a movie that is constantly telling you how to feel about America and about the forces that, I mean, you can easily extrapolate meaning from the situation that a lot of people in this film find themselves, these nomadic people. You can do that extra interpretive work yourself. It's not hard to see a critique of America in this film. Chloe Zhao is
Right.
not interested in. This is not a screed. Like Nomadland is not a screed.
No.
You know?
And to me, right, that's the thing, is I feel like just even the littlest bit of extrapolating, you can form an opinion on this movie. And I did not walk away from this movie going, I can't wait until I'm living in a van and working,
Right.
seasonally for Amazon. Like, the people that work for this company use buckets for bathrooms.
Right.
I don't think that it's pro Amazon.
Right.
I just don't think that that's the point. I don't think that that's the point of the movie.
Its ambivalence is one of the stronger things about the film, I think, honestly. That it does take it takes a decidedly non-judgmental look at this particular subculture of America and is not interested in telling you how to feel about it necessarily. And I think that's okay.
Yeah, I thought it was very clear-eyed in that way. And the sort of clear-eyed, non-judgmental aspect about it is like, I think that out of all the movies, what's interesting is I felt a more personal connection to Nomadland than I did to like Promising Young Woman. And in Nomadland, for some reason, it really struck me because I guess I'm a person who doesn't have a lot of hope or faith for a comfortable retirement. I just, for our generation, it's just not looking very likely. And so like watching this movie, I was just like, yeah, things do suck, but you can find meaning and beauty in life no matter your circumstances. I think that was more kind of what the movie was getting at than anything else.
Agreed. Okay, Katie, so what do you think is going to win Best Picture this year?
I still kind of think Nomadland might win because, it's got a lot of the major awards coming up behind it.
Yeah, I think that if you look at the precursors and you look at the path that's been laid out, Nomadland seems to be the front runner. It's won. So it won the Golden Globe, it won the BAFTA, it's won the DGA, it won the Producers Guild Award as well. It won the top prize at Venice. It was very well received at Toronto. This is a movie that this whole season it's been racking up awards. There's still a part of me, though, that feels reluctant about saying it's going to win because it just feels so different from the type of film that normally wins Best Picture.
Too good, maybe?
Yeah, well, honestly, yes. And I will say that Parasite winning last year gives me a little bit more. I'm going to be, my own Oscar predictions are on the site now, so you can see those. Nomadland is probably going to win, I guess I would say. There's some small part of me that says, like, there are members. It just feels like there are members of the Academy that would not go for something this sort of elegant and poetic and non-forceful in terms of its dramatic through line. It does feel in some respects too good for that body of voters. There is a small part of me that thinks that Trial of the Chicago 7 could still win. And
it's possible. I've heard this view that it's possible that it could win nothing but Best Picture.
Right. Here's the thing. Yeah. Here's the thing about it is that, not only is Trial, I do think that Trial is the most, if you were to look at this just abstractly, you're not seeing the films, or forget that actually, you have seen the films. Trial is the one that most looks like a traditional Academy Award pick for Best Picture of any of these films nominated. It is, I think, far and away the most conventional nominee of the bunch and the one that most aligns with the Academy's taste. Beyond that, it won the SAG Award. And actors make up, it won the SAG Ensemble Award a couple weeks ago, and actors make up the largest branch of the Academy. And you should never count out a film that has the eye and the affection of the actors branch, because last year, for example, Parasite won the SAG and then went on to win Best Picture. That can be a sign that it's going to happen for it. I see a little bit of Spotlight, for example, is another one that felt like an actor's movie in some respects. And I just think of these nominees, Trial might be the one that the actors rally around the most, even though it's only up for one individual acting award. So I could be wrong, but I do think it'll be Nomadland, but I think we should not be shocked. We should be disappointed but not shocked if Trial of the Chicago 7 wins.
Right, yeah. Well, hearing you talk about this, I feel like we're in a really interesting moment for the Academy Awards, where Parasite winning last year was a game changer in a lot of ways. But it's like, is it a new world now, or is that going to be an anomaly? That's sort of the precipice that we're on right now.
Well, yeah, let me remind you of something. We talked earlier about when Moonlight won. And that felt like a turning point. It was like, holy shit, Moonlight won. Like, that kind of movie can win Best Picture. It's a whole new Academy. And then what happened 2 years later? Green Book wins Best Picture.
Yeah, you're right.
2 years later. So,
Two steps forward, one step back. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, that's how I kind of feel about it. And I think the winner, the winners over the last 2 years have been generally a little hipper than they were before and a little bit better. I think that in general, the Academy's taste has gotten better over the years, and we've seen some really good winners over the last decade or so. But that doesn't mean that that a film like Trial can't still win, because honestly, if you look at these nominees, which one is most like Green Book? Probably Trial of Chicago 7,
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's got all the pieces. You're right. Yeah, all the pieces line up.
I mean, I would be going full force saying it's going to win if it had won really more this season in general. It does not have there's not a lot of, it did not pick up a ton of the precursors. It has not been a juggernaut this award season. It's been nominated for a lot. The SAG Ensemble win is like its biggest win pretty much. So it's totally possible that it's going to do nothing on Oscar night, but and you know what? Cross my fingers. I don't want to see this movie win Best Picture. What would you like to see win Best Picture? I know the answer, and the listeners know the answer.
You already know my answer. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. I think Nomadland, it was the best picture for me last year. I just felt that all the elements really came together in that film, and like objectively, I can point to all these things that were really well done about it. But, it had that added element to me of, like I said, personally, I felt like it spoke to some things that are it spoke to things about my life, and that is sort of the cherry on top for me of what is objectively a very good film.
Yeah. I think it's definitely the best in the nominees. I'd like to see Nomadland win. There's a couple other ones I have a lot of affection for too. The Father.
Like what?
The Father, I think, is a very good film. I mean, that does not. I don't think that has a snowball's chance in hell of winning Best Picture.
Unfortunately, I don't think so either.
That might be the least likely to win, honestly.
I was gonna ask you, which one would you just be completely blown backwards if it won?
I would be very shocked if The Father won Best Picture,
Yeah.
Especially with the preferential ballot. I just feel like, with the ballot system, I'm not going to try to explain that right now because it's kind of complicated, and I don't always I'd have to look up right now to get all the details exactly right. But the ballot system, it basically goes through multiple rounds often before you have a winner, and because you need a certain percentage of the vote in order to win Best Picture. So what happens is, you vote and everyone ranks the nominees, and I think it's probably very rare that something wins on the first ballot. What happens is you look at it, what are the percentages, and the one that has the lowest percentage gets dropped, and you move on to the next ballot. And I just kind of feel like The Father might be the one that
would drop to the bottom.
That would drop
in that
immediately,
way.
yeah. Just because, I mean, the people who have seen it, I think there probably is a lot of affection for it, but I also think it might be one of the least seen of the nominees. For one thing, because The Father, unlike all the other nominees, I think The Father was the last one that was available to watch at home. I think it is available now, but it was the last of these nominees that you could actually see from home. It did a theater,
which is a big factor this year.
A huge factor, a huge factor.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that voters didn't receive, screeners and such, but I do think it does mean that the Father still feels like the movie of this whole group that is the least seen, if that makes sense.
Well, that's interesting because we were kind of talking about how I think a lot of these films would have been nominated anyway, perhaps with the exception of Minari, like you said. Yeah. These would be contenders regardless, but that's an interesting perspective on what is different about this year. Normally you would have a lot of events in LA and in New York for voters to go and see movies in theaters. Normally, like you said, they'd all come back to theaters and you'd have the chance to see them all that way. But yeah, I wonder if it does privilege things that are available on streaming services a little bit, simply because everybody's watching their picks at home this year.
Yeah, probably. I mean, and even maybe this is a silly thought to have, but you have a stack of screeners. You can also watch a movie that's on Hulu, maybe you just go to Hulu.
I mean,
instead of reaching.
listen, I have so many movies that I have on Blu-ray.
Yeah.
But if it's on Criterion Channel, I'll put it on. I will literally put on a movie I own on Blu-ray on Criterion Channel. Like I won't get up to go get the Blu-ray.
Easier to access, and that is sort of a sad reality of contemporary movie watching is that ease of access does matter. Yeah.
Never underestimate those 30 seconds to get up and go get the Blu-ray.
The other one that I like is Judas and the Black Messiah. I would not mind seeing that win either. I think that is in the way that Trial of the Chicago 7 is sort of the feels like the most conventional and the most Oscar friendly. Judas and the Black Messiah has some of those same qualities, but it's actually very good and actually has a sharper,
a more radical message.
A more radical message, yes. So I wouldn't mind seeing that win either, and I think that would be thematically it might be one of the more appropriate winners of this bunch.
Yeah. All right, everybody, that wraps up our 4-part series on this year's Academy Awards, which will take place this Sunday, April 25th. You can follow along with us on avidclub.com for that ceremony. And in the meantime, please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to Film Club wherever you get your podcasts.
This week's episode of Film Club was hosted by me, Alex Dowd, and by Katie Rife. It was produced and edited by Carl Blomberg. Our sound mixer and finishing editor is Zach Goldsboro, and our motion graphics designer is Julie Mullins. Check back next week, post-Oscars, when we'll be talking about video game adaptations. Thanks, folks.
Bye.